Following the Russian seizure of Crimea from Ukraine in 2014, NATO countries agreed to spend 2% of their GDP on defense, and NATO has been pressing their members ever since to meet this goal. Up until the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, NATO largely ignored this target. Prior to the NATO Leader Summit in Washington, D.C., in July of this year, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced a record 23 of 32 NATO countries were meeting their defense spending goals. NATO leaders largely accepted this as a positive step, but they did not celebrate the 72% compliance rate, given that 100% of NATO countries had agreed to the target. It does mean that there is a sharp increase in European defense spending, as well as more ambitious defense plans. These plans necessitate manpower, but the problem is that across much of NATO, there is an ongoing struggle to recruit enough soldiers to fill the ranks and improve combat readiness to implement the plans. Updates to potential war plans in Europe against a potential conflict between NATO and Russia have resulted in the planned need for a deployment of up to 800,000 NATO soldiers. NATO countries also anticipate the need for an additional 31 to 50 new combat brigades to meet their updated war plans for a potential conflict in Europe. NATO countries are encountering a challenge that heightened defense spending alone cannot necessarily address: the recruitment of soldiers to accommodate the anticipated need to increase the ranks. Currently, 10 of 32 NATO nations have some form of conscription to help fill out their ranks, so these countries have been able to fill out their ranks as needed without the challenges experienced by volunteer-only militaries. The countries include the following: Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Greece, Turkey, the Netherlands. As a side note, Netherlands sends out conscription letters, however, the requirement to report has not existed since 1997. The remaining 22 NATO countries rely on voluntary service to recruit new members to the armed forces, but for the most part, they are struggling to meet the new recruiting goals and, even more alarmingly, the ability to recruit more than what they lose on an annual basis. For example, the United Kingdom reported that 5,800 more soldiers left than joined, and the German Bundeswehr reported 1,500 more soldiers left than joined in 2023. This is in contrast with the desire to grow the Bundeswehr from 181,500 to 203,000 by 2031. Romania currently possesses more F-16 fighter jets than the number of trained pilots or those in the training pipeline. This is also not limited to Europe, as the U.S. has been falling short of its recruiting goals, with the U.S. Army being nearly 40,000 troops short of authorized strength. The reason for the recruiting challenges is not one issue, and that makes the issue much more difficult to correct for NATO countries that exclusively rely on volunteers to address it. Professor Vincenzo Bove, a political science professor at Warwick University in the UK, has identified the causes of the recruitment challenges that are instructive. 1. Changing values. Young people are more pronounced against war and defense spending in general than in the past, so he argues their values have changed. 1. The statement is true, but young people have typically been idealistic, and this seems unchanged since the Cold War. 1. The lack of existential threats since the end of the Cold War may have contributed to this cause. 2. Low pay is not able to attract recruits. 2. This is generally true and has been an issue as militaries have often had to compete with private industry, which usually pays more to get new recruits. 2. Increased pay, benefits, and bonuses could help address the issue, but would require increased defense budgets or reductions in other areas of procurement. 3. Demographic changes are due to falling birth rates in the United States and Europe. 3. This reduces the pool of potential recruits and increases labor scarcity. 3. This means that private companies also must pay more due to increased labor scarcity, which makes the already low pay of the military more acute. To some extent, the never-ending increase in technology's capabilities can address these issues. automation has allowed armored vehicles to reduce their current or projected crew sizes. The drastic increase in drones on the battlefield, as well as the expected evolution of pilotless bombers, fighters, and submersible drones, will also alleviate some of the issues. Naval vessels also run with fewer sailors than they did in the past, as automated systems require fewer sailors, and the individual soldier and marine will be more lethal than ever with the equipment provided to them. The ongoing automation of society in general and militaries in particular will continue to reduce the need for future labor, as demographics will make labor scarcer than in the past. However, NATO's need for new recruits is a short-term security concern, and its perceived needs cannot wait for the better part of a generation for automation to make another leap forward in the never-ending evolution of military warfare. Suppose Professor Bove's list is correct. What can NATO countries do? We cannot adequately address the first issue of changing the values of young people in a short period of time unless we witness an event so shocking that it fundamentally shifts the paradigm. While these events do occur, their predictability is nearly impossible, making them unreliable for planning purposes. There are two ways to address the low-paying and demographic challenges. The first strategy involves increasing the pay and benefits for new recruits, thereby making the military a more attractive option compared to the civilian sector. If the change in pay and benefits is large enough, it will have an impact on recruiting. However, if we don't take steps to boost the population or expand the labor pool by postponing the retirement of older workers, the increased military pay will encourage the non-military sector of the economy to increase their labor rate. This will lead to a cycle of inflationary labor wages as both the military and non-military sectors vie for the same portion of the eligible labor pool. Capital investment will eventually help, but it will take time. The other options in the near and short term are to reintroduce conscription and have the military take the manpower it needs to meet its perceived requirements. This will have the unintended consequence of reducing the private sector labor pool, and it will most likely put upward pressure on private sector wages, making military retention more difficult or expensive. This would mean that an army would be less professional and capable, as the experienced cadre required to run the military would opt for the higher-paying and probably safer jobs of the private sector. The other option is to lower recruitment standards in order to increase the available labor pool for military service. This can include simple things like increasing or decreasing the age requirements, lowering the academic and aptitude standards, lowering the physical standards, which can possibly be redressed through physical training, or opening the recruitment to non-citizens or people with criminal records who may have otherwise been ineligible. Previous attempts have shown their effectiveness, yet the result is a military that is less competent and professional. When the military introduces new technology, it often necessitates higher aptitude service members to effectively utilize it, thereby discouraging the reduction of aptitude and intelligence standards. NATO governments are experimenting with programs that allow potential recruits to experience military training without any commitment, with the aim of attracting them. Additionally, they are offering physical training programs prior to training, aimed at addressing recruits who may have no other issues beyond being overweight or experiencing the effects of a sedentary lifestyle. All these programs are steps in the right direction, but in themselves, they will not address the full recruitment issue in the expected timeframe that NATO is setting for preparedness. Only a large-scale reintroduction of conscription, with all its drawbacks, or an increase in pay and benefits, can resolve these issues and make the military a competitive option for the eligible labor pool. Eventually, the increase in technology and the march toward automation will address many, but not all, of these military manpower issues. Automation will not completely replace people and their need to make decisions and perform required tasks, but there are other factors where capital investment will reduce the need for labor, even in the military, such as autonomous vehicles and auto-loading weapons. New systems may even reduce the need for the required numbers to maintain the continuous front, but those times are not here yet, and NATO civilian heads of state and policymakers must make decisions to address the recruitment issue or choose foreign policies that improve the security situation, protect society, and thus reduce the need for more soldiers.